for the 1676 battle. See Battle of Öland. The naval Battle of Öland took place on 26 July 1789 during the Russo-Swedish War. Background: the Swedish battle fleet had spent the winter at Karlskrona, which was struck by relapsing fever epidemic during the stay. Epidemic had started from the capture of the Russian ships of line Vladislav during the Battle of Öland in 1788. From the captured sailors, the disease had spread widely into the fleet during its prolonged stay at Sveaborg in 1788, was carried with the fleet to Karlskrona later that year. Fitting ships for the sealing season proceeded very slowly and was greatly hindered by the losses suffered due to the illness to the crews. From December 1788 to September 1789, total of 26,249 were treated for sickness in naval hospitals at Karlskrona alone, of whom 5,286 perished, while the total death toll of the epidemics is assumed to be around 15,000 lives. By the end of June, thousands of soldiers had to be sent from the infantry as reinforcements for the fleet. Regardless of the obstacles, Admiral Otto Henrik Nordenskjöld, who was responsible for refitting, was able to ready fleet of 21 ships of the line and 8 frigates for sailing already for the 6th of June, however without crews. The Russian fleet had spent the winter of 1788 to 1789 in split into several elements at Copenhagen, Reval and Kronstadt. Together with newly built ships and effective repairs of ships damaged earlier, the Russians were looking to be able to deploy around 40 ships capable to taking part to battle line with combined crew of roughly 30,000 men. Admiral Samuel Grieg, who had commanded the Russian fleet at the Battle of Öland, had perished in the autumn 1788, and Admiral von Dessen, who had commanded the elements of the Russian fleet deployed to Copenhagen, was removed from command. They were replaced respectively with Admirals Vasily Chichagov and Timofey Kozlyaninov. The goal for the Russian naval operations in 1789 was to link together the separated fleet elements and then engage the Swedish fleet as soon as possible, while meanwhile providing forces to uphold the blockades of the shipping routes along the Finnish coast. Lack of crews prevented the Swedish fleet from any training or exercises, and it was effectively confined to the docks. The fleet was finally able to set sail on the 6th of July, despite that several ships were still undermanned, several lacking more than 100 men from their complements. Having assembled 21 ships of the line and 8 large frigates under his flag, Prince Karl, Duke of Södermanland, decided to intercept the Russian fleet near the island of Öland before the elements of the Russian fleet would be able to link up. Admiral Otto Henrik Nordenskjöld acted as flag captain to the Duke Charles battle. After setting sail, the Swedish fleet patrolled the waters between Skane, Rügen, Bornholm and Själland in the southern Baltic Sea. Fleet was still not clean from diseases, and several small dispatch vessels were used for shipping healthy men to fleet while transporting ever-growing number of sick back to Karlskrona. On the 23rd of July did the Swedish fleet receive news that 35-ship-strong Russian fleet had been seen outside of Gotland, and finally at noon on the 25th of July were the first Russian ships sighted. Both fleets took northerly heading, and Swedish tried to close in the distance. The Russian fleet attempted to slip between the Swedes and Karlskrona, but when it became clear that it would not succeed, the Russians were content with just keeping distance to the Swedes. Winds were getting stronger, which prevented either side from taking action. Later on the 25th of July 1789, on morning of the 26th of July, fleets again sighted each other, and Swedes again attempted to close in and engage the Russian, but were unable to do so as the Russian fleet carefully avoided it. Further problem for the Swedes was that the rearguard commanded by Admiral Pililshorn had become separated from the rest of the fleet and did not rejoin it despite of repeatedly being ordered to do so. The Russian fleet continued evading the Swedish, trying to slip between the Swedes and their home port. Finally, by 1400 on the 26th of July had first ships reached the cannon range and started the battle. Varying winds forced battle to be paused between 1600 and 1800, but it was later commenced again. Fighting continued until 2000 when the Russian fleet turned towards east. Swedish fleet was unable to follow as the undermanned crews could not handle both guns and sails simultaneously. During the battle the fleets remained fair distance apart and the cannons were fired near their maximum ranges and thus had very little effect. Misfiring cannons and barrel explosions were the main cause of losses on both sides. During the fight 3 trailing ships of the Russian fleet were left separated from the rest of the fleet. Several Swedish ships were ordered to engage these stragglers, but the Swedish ships turned away before even reaching the cannon range. Captains of the ships later claimed that they turned away from the Russian ships according to orders from Admiral Liljeholm, who kept his ships away from the fight. Swedes were able to receive reinforcements and ship out the sick on the 28th of July, after which the Swedish turned again to chase the Russians, but without success as the Russians repeatedly avoided engaging the Swedish fleet. Similar action was repeated on following days until on the 30th of July the continuously worsening sickness amongst the crews forced the Swedes to seriously consider returning to their base, as roughly 2,500 men had gotten sick after the fleet had set sail. On the 31st of July the wind turned, which was seen as favorable for arrival of the Russian squadron from Copenhagen. To avoid being caught between two Russian fleets, the Swedish fleet started back towards Karlskrona. On the same day the Russian squadron from Copenhagen joined with the Russian fleet. Aftermath. For 3 days the fleets maneuvered within sight of each other, but finally the Swedes retreated to the naval base at Karlskrona. The battle ended in a draw, but the Russians remained in control of the Baltic Sea. The epidemic that still had not ended at Karlskrona then confined the Swedish fleet to its anchorage for most of the remainder of the year. Per Liljeholm was stripped of his admiral's rank even before the fleet returned to Karlskrona. Suspicions concerning Liljeholm arose after the debacle. It was widely suspected that the Russians had bribed him. A court-martial convicted him, but the government declined to execute him. Chichagov too was investigated for his inaction in avoidance of battle. However, the court-martial found him not found guilty, because his orders explicitly stated that he should first rendezvous with the Russian squadron from Copenhagen before engaging the Swedish fleet. The rival fleets, Sweden Vladislav 76 on Iton 74 Gotthard on 74 Kung Adolf Fredrik 74 Kung Gustav III 74 Louise Ulrika 74 Sophia Magdalena 74 Fredensland at 66 Erin 64 Dristjeten 64 Digden 64 Forsythjeten 64 Hedvig Elizabeth Charlotte 64 Manlyjeten 64 Omerton 64 Prince Carl 64 Prince Frederick Adolf 64 Tapperheten 64 Ratvisen 62 Wasser 62 Rixen Stander 60 Gripen 44 Upperland 44 Eurydice 40 Freya 40 Galathia 40 Minerva 40 Thetis 40 Zamaya 40 Russia Rostislav 100 Dvyanartsat Apostoliv 100 Niaz Vladimir 100 Ezekiel 78 Kir Johan 74 Mstislav 74 Pobidoslav 74 Prince Gustav 74 Siverts Elena 74 Siverts Petr 74 Yaroslav 74 Bolslav 66 Deris 66 Izyaslav 66 Pamyatev Stafius 66 Rodislav 66 Sviatoslav 66 Victor 66 Vyacheslav 66 Bibliography R.C. Anderson Naval Wars in the Baltic, 1522–1850. Johnson, Raoul. Gronrus, Maria. Kartunen, Ilka, eds. Gustav III Yasuri Minnesota. Gustav III and the Great Naval War. Helsinki. John Nurmanen Foundation. ISBN 9789529745319. Mattila, Tarpani. Meri me amaturvana, see Safeguarding Our Country. Javaskila. KJ. Gumaras Osaki Show. ISBN 951-994870-8. Magnus Ullman. Från Högland till Svensk Sund. From Högland to Svensk Sund.